5 more to go. You guys having a picnic? But I guess you aren't friendly enough to invite me.
Willy Wombat on the Sega Saturn. This game is probably best known for the fact that if you Wikipedia search this game, you get redirected to Crash Bandicoot because Crash Bandicoot's original name was going to be Willy Wombat. And that's pretty much the sole amount of any sort of historical value this game actually has. But it's actually a pretty cool import game that is ridiculously easy to get into because it basically has zero language barrier. This was a game I played a little bit on my satiator back when I was still capable of doing that, and it was a game I had always wanted to play. It was a lot of fun. A little difficult, but one I was very much enjoying. And Jetwolf actually sent me a copy, and it's been a bit of a dream come true to be able to play this. It's definitely been high up on my list of Saturn games to play. Now, I need to stress that if anything does look weird here, to reiterate, my Saturn is still out of commission. I could not actually record this on my Saturn, so I thought this would be a fun way to sort of have an excuse to test out how the Odin handles Saturn emulation, and I can say with full confidence, it's definitely a mixed bag. The Saturn is kind of a weird console to emulate, always has been. So yeah, if anything looks weird in this footage, it's not the game's fault, or at least from what I remember playing it on the actual Saturn, it shouldn't be. I noticed that shadows kind of just showed up as like transparencies, which looks very, very odd. The game over screen has usually like this weird random stretching effect. On one stage, it just refused to load the texture for the floor and it kind of flashed, and you know, as someone with some photosensitivity, that kind of sucked. But again, just to reiterate, if anything looks weird in the footage I'm going to show, it's because I'm not actually playing this on an actual Saturn, and it was an excuse to test out the Odin Saturn capabilities. I wasn't playing this in the most optimal conditions. I'm not going to blame the game on that, neither should you. The story is actually pretty complex and interesting. It follows the titular Willy Wombat, a fugitive of sorts. He used to be a sort of high-rank guy in this utopian society known as prison, which, pro tip, don't name your utopian society prison. It might give some people some bad ideas. See, it turns out Willy learned some things he probably shouldn't have. But when he did that, he immediately fled because he couldn't stand for this society any longer and went off to look for the 6 miracle gems to find Eden. Unfortunately, you know, what with him being kind of a higher up guy, yeah, the people of prison weren't so happy about this and sent 3, like, top military people to hunt him down. You have Notes, someone who would have been Willy's best friend in his previous life. Male.
I calculate the weight to be 120 pounds, and from the footprints, the height to be 69 inches. Also, from the dirt residue left behind, he was traveling at around 40 miles per hour.
A lady with tracking skills way too amazing to actually be real. I'm very impressed with her skills. And Tagdor, who is just sort of there and doesn't want to be, and definitely won't be a big deal later, I promise. The story itself actually has a great deal of characterization and character growth, and it's surprisingly deep. You don't exactly get character beats every single level or anything like that, but when they do come, they are engaging and interesting, and I was really interested in these characters and what they were doing with them. And it does go some pretty interesting places. And it's entirely in English. And I don't mean awkward bad English, I mean they actually have a pretty decent English cast doing a relatively good job. I was thoroughly impressed at how just, I don't want to say easy to understand because it's actually kind of a complex plot for how little you get, but how it was presented and how easy it was to follow, you know, in terms of the fact that it was actually made entirely in English, in spite of this being a Japanese exclusive game. Anyway, Willy has to ultimately navigate these environments, find the exit, find the miracle gems, and find Eden, all while evading capture, and lots and lots and lots and lots of monsters, because seriously, this game does some actually very technically impressive things. This game is a isometric platformer, and I know that'll make some people groan for sure, and certainly I died a whole bunch because of that fact, but it actually does some pretty interesting things with that. For one thing, you can actually modify the camera angle at any time using the shoulder buttons. It kind of tries to sidestep the whole huge issue isometric games have, which is that it's hard to understand where stuff is relative to yourself, or indeed that you might not be able to see things relative to the environment being in the way of the camera. And while this does get around this problem in a sense, and to be fair, there really aren't any other isometric platformers from this time that even thought to do this, there's still things that get stuck behind environments and stuff that the camera will miss, and it still has issues with judging distance because of just how the camera is situated no matter what way you rotate it. But I have to commend them for making that effort. It's, again, really impressive that this game even bothered to do that in the first place. The second thing that really stood out to me about the gameplay itself was just how massive the enemies were. Like, enemies in this game come in huge swaths. And bear in mind, this is before Dynasty Warriors 2. If you ran into more than 5 enemies on screen in an average game, that was a big deal. This game will frequently have like 10, 20 characters on screen at once without a hint of slowdown. It's genuinely quite impressive that it handles as many enemies at once as it does, with really no sense of slowing down or hindering the hardware whatsoever. Unfortunately, when you combine this with the isometric camera, it's easy to lose track of some enemies, and because there's so many, it's real easy to get swarmed. And yeah, this game is actually quite difficult because of it. See, Willy, being the vigilante he is, no longer has the huge military-industrial complex supporting him and his war efforts. He doesn't have much of a budget. In fact, I think he went to a dollar store that had a buy one get one free deal on for boomerangs, and could afford only one. Yeah, Willy, he fights using boomerangs, and what's really cool is he can actually use them both as projectiles and melee attacks, and because he has two, you could, in theory, keep one for a distance attack and one for melee in case enemies get too close, which indeed, because they swarm you at the sort of volume that they do, is very frequent. Or you could throw them both, and, you know, if you do that, then you're going to stand around without a weapon to your name, and you're going to get swarmed. Maybe don't do that, is what I'm saying. But the boomerangs themselves are quite a versatile weapon. You can use them to attack enemies, certainly, but you can also use them to pick up health, power-ups, as well as collect objects in the environment to get more points, which is very, very important, as well as activate switches at a distance. So it's used quite frequently in the actual puzzle solving of the game in order to get through the environments. As I mentioned a moment ago, you can collect points by picking up random collectibles in the environment, and this has actual implications on the gameplay. See, depending on how well you do on each stage, i.e. what score you got based on the collectibles and stuff, you will get tokens. These tokens are then in turn used to buy saves. Effectively, every time you need to save, you spend 3 tokens. Now this isn't a problem if you're playing very, very well as an explorer, because completing a stage completely will give you those 3 tokens. If you do less well, however, you may only be rewarded 1 or 2, and with that in mind, you can no longer save between each stage, and saving becomes a manageable resource you have to keep on top of. Or you could, grind stages to just keep getting more tokens, I guess, but the point is that they tried to make saving something meaningful. It wasn't something you can just do whenever, unless you're really on top of your A game, and even then, it might be better to just hold on to it, which is a very tough call you need to make because this game is very, very tricky just by virtue of how many enemies are in each stage and how unforgiving this game can really be. Certainly there's the problems that come about just in terms of the volume of enemies and of course isometric camera problems, but just in general, Willy does not have a lot of health, and while you can pick up more, they are certainly not common. This game is very unforgiving and will punish you, and in certain spots it can feel a little bit unfair just by the sheer volume of traps or enemies, which in turn means that you have to take each level very slowly. This is not a super fast-paced game. It feels more like a game where you take each challenge on a room-by-room basis, because most enemies are usually sequestered in individual areas where they won't necessarily immediately detect you, or where they're actually sectioned off and can't actually hurt you until you activate a switch or something. Pretty much every area can be handled in a sort of strategic, maybe not quite stealth sort of way, but attacking enemies before they have any real chance to attack you sort of situation. And indeed, that seems to be the ideal way to handle most encounters. That said, while a lot of maps in this game tend to be designed to be sort of labyrinthian, where you have to sort of get around various environments, enemies, and traps in order to unlock the way to the end, some levels completely buck this trend by having like a huge open world with smaller little bottlenecks to get through. And I remember this specifically with the first level that this system had trouble rendering the floor on, so I won't show it because it was a little bit photosensitive-y. I will say that it went from several like small corridors and tiny rooms to just the entire level was basically one huge room all at once. And it was impressive to see a stage that big, but it was also impressive to see that the developers were willing to test out new ideas and work with completely different design mentalities for their maps. It means that basically any level could be a completely new idea and challenge just based on how you're supposed to encounter it and how enemies are set up to encounter you. And that really did surprise me because, like I said, the opening of this game, and indeed the entire first chapter more or less, is very small individual rooms interconnected with one another, where you just sort of have to handle them one at a time. So to be hit with like what was effectively one giant room-sized level, that was completely different. It totally changed the pace and the way I had to approach the level. I kind of loved that, and it made the game even more exciting and engaging because what's the game going to throw at me next? And from the perspective of someone who doesn't understand the language and is importing, this game is entirely playable. There is no real issue with language barriers because all the audio is recorded in English, including the theme song. The only time where there was any potential issue is on the save screens, which once you use them once, you'll know what the buttons do anyway. And when you happen to expand your little repertoire of abilities, you will have to go through a dialogue box entirely in Japanese, but they still tell you exactly what buttons to press, so it's not really that much of an issue. And because of this, it is entirely approachable and indeed easy to hop in and enjoy this game, even if you can't read a lick of Japanese like me. Because of that, I think that Willy Wombat is an excellent game in terms of gameplay. It's certainly difficult, and it's going to have the same issues that basically every isometric game has, although it does at least make attempts to mitigate that. So if you're someone who doesn't like isometric games, this one will still probably have some issues with you, but at least it's trying to make the effort to make it more enjoyable. And if you're cool with isometric games, then this is one of the best ones on the Saturn, I think. It's certainly one of the most approachable and easy to get into. And because of that, I think it is excellent gameplay-wise. Now, in terms of presentation, Willy Wombat is really well done. Unfortunately, because of how I had to play this, some of that stuff gets lost, so I can't show off some of the nicer stuff. I might have some demo footage that actually shows some of the nicer areas that didn't glitch out, so I might try and cram some of that in, but there are some really beautiful areas in this game. The characters are all very, very cool. I love Willy Wombat and his sort of Darkwing Duck Batman-esque dark vigilante aesthetic. The three bounty hunters that are after you all look awesome and have their own very clearly distinct personalities, which are brought out in their physical designs. And the environments and the enemies are very, very cool. I just love exploring this world. The audio is fantastic. Like I said, the game is entirely dubbed in English and relatively well done English as well. There is one thing that kind of sticks out to me in terms of the dubbing though, and that is when you go into Wrinkly Kong's save cave to save, they do utilize a voice clip of Willy saying okay, as in like, you know, I'm okay with this, I want to save. Except it's clearly grabbed from like a different line in the game, because, you know, if you're just saying, okay, I want to save, you'd be like, yeah, okay. Except he goes, okay. Like he's clearly grabbing this audio line from some other probably more action-filled scene. It sounds a little bit out of place. But otherwise, the voice acting is tremendous. And again, for a Japanese exclusive import to be dubbed entirely in English, it was done really, really well. The thing that really stood out to me about the audio was that they have a vocalized theme song that is also dubbed in English, and it's really, really good. The soundtrack to this game just slaps. I quite like the audio to Willy Wombat, and it does go the extra mile for making it a lot more impressive for someone outside of Japan, which again makes it quizzical that this was never made available outside of there. Now, if you want a copy of Crash Bandicoot on the Sega Saturn, cheapest copy I see right now is $90. And I have to give, once again, a huge shout out and thank you to Jet Wolf for sending this to me. This was one that I really wanted for a while, but I just could not justify that price. And seriously, this is the second really awesome Saturn game he sent me that I've always wanted, but just couldn't make it happen on my own. So once again, thank you, Jet Wolf, and your awesome taste in Saturn games. For $90, I would say if you're looking for an import for the Saturn, it's definitely one to look out for. I'm not necessarily certain I would put it on the top class imports. There are certainly ones that I think are better for roughly the same value. Jet Wolf's previously sent to me Bulk Slash was another very expensive Sega Saturn game that I think I enjoyed a little bit more, and while that game is a lot shorter, I think it's just flat out one of the best Saturn games. So maybe look for that before this. And if you're looking for like an isometric game and you're okay with a little bit of challenge, something like, say, Steam Gear MASH, which I reviewed forever ago, is way more affordable. Last I checked, it was like $15. And of course, you could try and get your hands on the good version of Sonic 3D Blast, which I will die on that hill and tell you is good. Not the Genesis version, but the Saturn version is worth it for the soundtrack alone. But the point is, Willy Wombat is good. It's pricey for what it is, but if you're looking for an interesting import and you don't have it in your collection yet, it's definitely one to consider because it is just so bloody approachable. And the fact that it does make strides to try and be far more playable and enjoyable in spite of it being a isometric game. I did not get to play this in the most ideal of conditions. I didn't get to play this with a Saturn controller. I had to play it on the Odin, which the Saturn emulation on that's a little bit wonky at the best of times, which is Saturn emulation in general. So, you know, I didn't have the best time playing this, but it wasn't the game's fault. And I'm just hoping that comes through on the gameplay I'm showing you because, again, I didn't have the best environment to show this off in, but I will say that the game itself, in spite of that, was a lot of fun, and I was having an absolute blast, even though I was dying frequently because of some isometric nonsense and just the controls weren't really registering the way I would have liked them to. But even in situations where I was having trouble playing the game because of various issues, I was still having a blast. And that's what Willy Wombat is. It is a fantastic import. It's challenging, it's difficult, and I certainly didn't get to play it in the most optimal conditions, and I look forward to getting a new Saturn so I can. But if I can enjoy it in spite of that, that's a sign that that game has done something good.
Hey, Notes, you must be feeling very powerful with all your friends, but I can't let you guys capture me yet. Not until I find Eden.
Eden?
See you around.